project planning and control, PP&C risk, execution and communication, managing the full picture. Course 4, Module 2. Module 2, Contract Assessment. In this module, we'll examine how contract assessment helps PP&C professionals evaluate program performance and financial health. We'll explore how different contract types allocate risk, review the major elements of contractor costs, and learn how to interpret financial reports and workforce trends. We'll also discuss subcontract performance and practical techniques for assessing contractor data, enabling you to identify potential issues early and provide meaningful recommendations that support informed program management decisions. Module 2 opens with the core premise. NASA and DoD contract out the majority of their work, which means your monthly job requires reading what the contractor tells you and knowing where to look for what they are not volunteering. The 15.533 checklist at the end of this module was not invented. It is a distillation of the analytical protocol used by experienced analysts at NASA Goddard for decades. After this module, picking up a 533 or CPR and knowing which line items to look at first is the minimum competency. Identifying the red flags buried in the middle pages is the target. Contract cost analysis is where most analysts never go deep enough. This module is the remedy. This section title slide opens the contract analysis content, signaling the shift from understanding what contracts are to understanding what they cost and why. Contract analysis is not a one-time activity at Award. It is a monthly discipline that runs through the entire implementation phase of every cost-plus contract on your project. The analyst who reviews the 533 in the first week of each month and asks the right questions is doing contract analysis. The analyst who files it and references it at year-end reviews is not. Build a monthly rhythm around the 533. The questions in this module are your protocol. Contractor costs are built from multiple elements, and understanding how those elements relate to each other is the prerequisite for catching any variance that actually matters. The phrase common elements of cost is important. These categories exist across virtually all major aerospace contractors, which means that once you learn them on one contract, they transfer directly to the next one. Most cost surprises on development programs are not caused by a single event. They're caused by an analyst who understood the total but not the components. Learn the structure first. The rule of thumb expectations for each element come next, and they only make sense once you understand what each element contains. 6 specific analytical habits define the competent contract cost analyst: continuous monitoring, understanding reporting categories, securing the right deliverables up front, reviewing with technical managers, reporting with recommendations, and knowing the contractor personally. The phrase data deliverables are not free is one of the most practically important sentences in this module. Asking for a deliverable after contract award will cost you, both in dollars and in time. Most of these habits can only be built through deliberate practice. An analyst new to a contract should read this list and identify which habits are already in place and which are not. The 6th habit, develop a relationship with your contract counterparts, is the one most analysts skip. It is also the one that gives you an early warning on everything else. The same graphing and pattern recognition principles from Course 3 apply directly to contractor cost data. Steep buildups, severe drop-offs, dips, and short peak periods are all signals that warrant investigation. Converting to constant year dollars before graphing is not optional. Inflation can make a flat-performing contractor look like they are growing, or a declining one look stable. Quarterly analysis reveals trends that monthly data can obscure and annual data can completely hide. The frequency of analysis should match the pace of risk in the program. Treat the contractor's cost data exactly the way you treat your own project data. Graph it. Convert it to constant dollars. Look for the patterns. The full cost structure of a government contract, from direct labor through G&A and fee, is governed by generally accepted accounting principles, which means the categories are consistent across virtually all major aerospace contractors. The prime contractor hierarchy shown here matters because every element at the subcontract level is also fully loaded. When you see the subcontract line on a 533, that single number contains direct labor, overhead, G&A, and fee all rolled in. GAAP compliance provides a consistent framework but not a guarantee of honest reporting. Understanding the structure is what allows you to ask the right questions when something does not add up. Study this cost element map until you can reconstruct it from memory. Every analysis in this module traces back to it. Productive hours are the foundation of contractor labor costs. 2,080 total potential hours minus non-productive time equals approximately 1,880 billable hours per year, which is the standard work year equivalent. The 1880 WY standard varies by contractor. Companies that shut down between Christmas and New Year or have generous PTO policies will have lower productive hour totals, which directly affect their cost per WY. When comparing labor cost across contractors or across years on the same contract, using WYs instead of raw hours removes the variability introduced by different accounting calendars. Always confirm what one WY equals for your specific contractor before doing any rate analysis. A 5% difference in productive hours can produce misleading cost comparisons if left unaddressed. This chart applies the same 4 pattern flags from Course 3 directly to workforce data. Steep buildups, severe drop-offs, dips, and short peak periods in WY data are all signals that require explanation before they can be accepted. Large organizations move slowly. They do not instantly hire to peak, and they do not instantly release people. Any WY chart that shows those patterns almost certainly reflects a planning assumption rather than an executable reality. The patterns here are not automatically wrong. The standard is that if any of them appear, an investigation is required. There may be a legitimate reason, but you need to find it before accepting the plan. When reviewing a contractor's workforce proposal or monthly report, apply these 4 pattern flags as your first screening. Flag anything that fails the screening and ask for the explanation. The same workforce plan looks very different at annual versus quarterly resolution. An annual plan that looks smooth can contain a quarterly pattern that shows instant peak staffing, dips that imply termination and rehiring, and drop-offs that are implausible. Contractors often submit annual plans that smooth over what would be implausible quarterly patterns. Always ask for the quarterly breakdown before accepting the annual summary. The question to ask about every suspicious pattern is the same. Is there a legitimate programmatic reason for this shape, or is it a financial artifact? The answer is almost never obvious from the chart alone. None of these patterns is inherently wrong, but none should be accepted without an explanation. Your job is to ask the question. Direct labor includes all hours and costs, regular time, and overtime that can be directly allocated to the contract. Subcontract work is explicitly excluded and appears as a separate line item. Both hands-on technical work and supervisory hours are direct labor. The distinction that matters for analysis is not between types of direct work, but between direct and indirect labor, because they are priced differently. Direct labor is typically the largest single cost element on a development contract. Everything else is either a rate applied to it or a separate line that grows in proportion to it. Direct labor is where 80% of your analytical effort should start. If direct labor is off, everything downstream of it will be off as well. Direct labor cost per WY is the rate at which workforce dollars are consumed. It should decrease during build-up periods as less senior workers join the team and increase during drop-off periods as junior workers leave first. The expectation that $/$WY decreases during build-up is counterintuitive to some analysts. The key is that additional workforce in a ramp-up phase is usually less experienced and therefore less expensive per WY. When $/$WY moves in the opposite direction from what the workforce size would predict, that is a signal worth investigating. It usually means the skill mix has shifted in a way that was not planned. Build a $/$WY trend chart for every cost-plus contract you manage. It is one of the most sensitive early warning tools available for detecting workforce cost pressures. A meaningful $/$WY spread between high and low rates requires at least 20% variance. Below that, the skill mix is too homogeneous to explain much, and above that, a shift in mix becomes analytically significant. The range of $150,000 to $250,000 per WY for an engineering-heavy workforce is a practical benchmark if a contract is running significantly above or below that range. The question of why is immediate. When WYs stay flat year over year, but $/$WY changes in constant dollars, the workforce composition is shifting, and that shift needs to be understood before it shows up as a variance in the total cost number. Know your contract's average $/$WY. Make it a number you can quote from memory. Deviations from that number are your first signal that something in the workforce structure has changed. The chart shows a situation in which the $/$WY rate decreases during a drop-off period, violating the expected pattern and warranting an investigation into who is being released and at what seniority level. Normally, rates should increase during drop-off because junior workers leave first. If rates are decreasing during drop-off, it means either that senior people are leaving first or that the workforce composition is changing in an unexpected way. Investigating functional cost per WY, breaking $/$WY down by engineering, manufacturing, and other disciplines is the right next step when the aggregate rate does not follow expectations. Never accept a $/$WY trend that contradicts what you would expect from workforce logic without an explanation from the contractor. Indirect labor includes all hours that cannot be directly allocated to a specific contract, such as warehouse managers, accounting, legal, IT support, and corporate management, which are collected in a pool and spread across multiple contracts. At NASA, the equivalent is the Center Management Office. All of those functions cost money, and that cost is spread across every contract the center is executing through the overhead rate structure. The key analytical implication of indirect labor is that it is shared, meaning changes in the contractor's overall business base, not just your contract, can affect what you pay in overhead. When your overhead rate changes unexpectedly, always ask about the contractor's total business base. The cause of the change may have nothing to do with your contract. Direct labor overhead covers the division-level costs related to direct labor that are not allocable to a specific job, such as facility costs, payroll benefits, and indirect labor, expressed as a percentage of direct labor cost. For prime contractors, DLOH can run as high as 100% of direct labor cost. For on-site NASA support contractors where facilities and IT are government-provided, it runs closer to 50%. The DLOH percentage is a function of both fixed costs, which remain constant, and variable costs, which vary with the workforce. So the relationship between DLOH and headcount is not linear. Always get the pool and base assumptions behind any overhead rate before accepting it. A rate that looks competitive can be misleading if the base assumptions are aggressive. The prime versus support contractor distinction matters here. Prime contractors carry their full facility and benefits burden, while on-site support contractors have much of that covered by the government's infrastructure. Healthcare costs and retirement contribution growth have been significant overhead drivers over the past decade. A contractor with generous benefits can run DLOH rates that look alarming until you understand what is inside them. Understanding what is in the overhead pool, specifically the fixed versus variable components, tells you what the overhead rate will do as the workforce grows or shrinks. The overhead rate is not just a number to accept at face value. It has a structure, and that structure tells you something about the contractor's cost behavior as the program evolves. Overhead cost analysis requires distinguishing between fixed overhead components that stay constant as direct labor changes and variable components that move proportionally. The interaction between these two is what creates the inverse relationship between overhead percentage and direct labor base. Fixed overhead costs, such as building leases, do not disappear when headcount drops, which is why the overhead percentage increases when direct labor decreases. The fixed costs are being spread over fewer labor dollars. The three analytical expectations: overhead percent decreases when DL increases when DL decreases, and stays constant when DL stays constant, are the framework for identifying when something unusual is happening. Memorize those three expectations and apply them every month. Any deviation from them is a question to ask, not an error to assume. On major development contracts, overhead can range from 100 to 150% of direct labor costs, a figure that surprises people from environments with simpler cost structures. The on-site versus off-site distinction is practically important. A contractor with an office in NASA's building has dramatically lower facilities overhead than one running their own facility across town. If your contract is only a small slice of the contractor's total business, their overhead rate follows their total book of business, not yours, a fact that creates risk when they win or lose other contracts. Know how large your contract is relative to the contractor's total base. If you're a major customer, changes in their overhead rate are largely driven by you. If you are a minor, you are along for a ride you do not control. The overhead chart illustrates the interaction between fixed and variable components. As direct labor increases, overhead grows, but at a slower rate, lowering the overhead percentage. As direct labor decreases, overhead holds relatively steady, raising the percentage. Year 1 showing equal DL and overhead cost is unusual and worth noting. In a development contract where the workforce is still ramping up, you would expect overhead to be proportionally lower early on. The flattening of overhead growth relative to DL growth as the workforce scales up is a mathematically predictable outcome of the fixed cost component. It is not a warning sign. It is expected behavior. Use this chart as a visual anchor for the inverse relationship principle. When you see the overhead percentage doing the opposite, that is when to ask questions. When the overhead rate remains constant during a direct labor drop-off period, which is the opposite of expected behavior, it means the contractor's total business base must be growing to compensate. In this example, the project was 100% of the contractor's business base at the start. As the project winds down, if overhead rates hold steady, new business must be coming in, and you need to understand what that business is and whether it is creating resource competition for your program. An overhead rate that does not behave as expected is not always a problem, but it always requires an explanation. The explanation will tell you something important about the contractor's overall financial health. Track the contractor's total business base, not just their work on your contract. Changes in their base change your overhead rate in ways that have nothing to do with your program's performance. ODC includes costs related to direct labor that can be reasonably traced back to the specific job. Subcontracts, special tooling, travel, data and IT, consultants, and reproduction costs, typically expressed as a percentage of direct labor. ODC is not a residual catch-all. Each element should be identifiable and justifiable. When a contractor proposes ODC as a lump sum percentage without itemizing what it includes, that is the first thing to challenge. ODC percentage should remain relatively constant as direct labor changes, because most ODC elements scale with the workforce doing the work. When a contractor proposes ODC, ask for the itemized breakdown. Know what you are paying for before you accept the percentage. ODC is typically expressed as a percentage of direct labor cost, which provides a stable benchmark for comparison across periods, contractors, and contract phases. The EVM system cost, if the contract requires one, sometimes appears in ODC because it cannot be allocated to a single direct labor category. Know where it sits on your specific contract. A rising ODC percentage that is not explained by a specific event, a new data processing center, or major travel for problem resolution is a signal that something in the contractor's overhead allocation has shifted. ODC is not where most of the money lives, but it is where unusual spending can hide. Build an ODC trend and review it alongside direct labor every quarter. The expected behavior for ODC is that the percentage remains roughly constant regardless of whether direct labor is building up, holding steady, or declining, because ODC is a variable cost that tracks with the work. Specific events, such as starting a new data processing center or an unusual travel spike for a problem review, are legitimate causes of a temporary increase in the ODC percentage. The question is whether they appear in the variance explanation. If the ODC percentage is drifting up over multiple periods without a specific event to explain it, the contractor may be reclassifying costs from other categories into ODC, where oversight is less stringent. When the ODC percentage moves, ask for the itemized breakdown for that specific period. The explanation should point to a specific event, not vague overhead growth. The ODC chart visually confirms the constant percentage expectation through the build-up, steady state, and drop-off phases. ODC should be tracked as a consistent percentage of direct labor because it is fundamentally variable in nature with a minimal fixed component. The absence of a significant fixed ODC component is what distinguishes it from overhead. This is why the ODC percentage does not follow the inverse pattern that overhead does when direct labor changes. Panels A, B, and C represent the three phases and all show the same ODC to DL ratio. This consistency is the standard against which actual data should be compared each period. If actual ODC behavior starts to look like overhead behavior, holding flat when DL drops, that is a misclassification signal worth investigating. Subcontract costs appear as a single, fully loaded line item in the prime contractor's cost report, but that single number includes the subcontractor's direct labor, overhead, G&A, and fee, all rolled together. Subcontractors are often hired precisely because they are experts that the prime does not have in-house. That expertise commands a premium, and the fully loaded cost of that premium is what the government ultimately pays. The single-line presentation of subcontract costs on the 533 creates a natural blind spot. It is easy to accept a number that looks reasonable without understanding what is inside it. Whenever you see a significant subcontract line item, ask for the underlying cost structure. You should understand what you are paying for at the same level of detail as the prime's direct costs. Subcontractor growth is one of the most common sources of major overruns in development programs, and it is an area where both project managers and prime contractors are often reluctant to be transparent. The statement that it is the prime's job to manage their subs is often used as a reason not to look deeper. It is not a reason. Subcontract problems become your problem when they drive cost and schedule growth on your program. The government analyst's responsibility extends to understanding subcontract performance even when the prime insists their management is sufficient. Your analysis should include a regular review of subcontract performance data. Establish subcontract reporting as a contractual deliverable from day one. Do not wait until a problem surfaces to start asking questions about what is happening one tier down. The rule of thumb cost distribution shows that on a typical development contract, approximately 70% of prime costs are labor, and across all subcontract tiers, labor represents 76% of total project cost. If the distribution on your contract departs significantly from these benchmarks, for example, if purchase parts are running at 30% instead of the expected 12%, that departure warrants an explanation. These percentages are a starting calibration, not a hard rule. Programs with heavy hardware procurement will skew toward material and purchase parts. The key is knowing what your program's distribution should look like and tracking whether actuals follow it. Build the expected cost distribution for your specific program at contract award and compare actuals to it annually. Drifts from the expected distribution are early indicators of structural cost shifts. Material costs cover the lower-level parts and components needed for the work, typically off-the-shelf items rather than assembled systems requiring their own design and development process. Material procurement has historically been a source of fraud risk. Non-standard or unqualified parts introduced through the supply chain can create both safety and cost issues that do not surface until integration or testing. Material cost is a smaller percentage of total program cost than labor, but can spike unexpectedly when component obsolescence, qualification failures, or sole source premiums drive unit costs above plan. Track material cost per unit or poor delivery against the proposed estimate. Significant cost growth in material lines often traces to technical problems at the component level that have not yet surfaced as formal program risks. Material overhead covers the procurement, receiving, and inspection costs associated with materials and subcontracted items, generally expected to run below 5% of material cost, depending on the company structure. Interdivisional charges arise when work is performed for the prime by another division of the same company, sometimes referred to as IDWA. These charges carry all the same overhead and G&A implications as external subcontracts. Material overhead is not a major cost driver on most programs, but an unusually high rate can indicate that the contractor is routing more costs than expected through the procurement and inspection function. Validate material overhead percentage against proposed rates at least annually. If it is drifting above 5% without a programmatic explanation, investigate what is in the pool. G&A covers corporate headquarters costs, bid and proposal costs, and independent research and development, expressed as a percentage of all direct and indirect costs, and typically running 8 to 10% for major aerospace contractors. G&A is probably the cost category most open to scrutiny and variability between companies. DCA and DCMA exist specifically to validate that G&A charges are allowable under government contracting rules. The G&A percentage on your contract depends on the contractor's total business base, not just your program. When they win or lose other business, your G&A rate moves with it. Understand the G&A pool and base assumptions for your contractor at contract award and revisit them annually. A G&A rate that has shifted 2 to 3 percentage points without explanation represents a significant change in your cost structure. The G&A base includes direct labor overhead, ODC, subcontracts, materials, and material overhead, which means G&A is applied to nearly every cost element, making it a multiplier on everything the contractor spends. Company president costs can sometimes appear in G&A rather than direct labor overhead, depending on how the contractor structures their accounts. Always confirm where executive costs are sitting before accepting the rates. Because G&A is a percentage of the entire cost base, a 1% change in the G&A rate has a larger dollar impact on large programs than it would appear. The absolute dollar shift compounds with program size. For any major contract, calculate what a 1% change in G&A rate means in absolute dollars. That number will focus your attention appropriately on rate validation. The three expectations for G&A behavior mirror the overhead expectations. When the G&A base grows, the rate should drop. When it shrinks, the rate should rise. And when it holds steady, the rate should hold steady. If your contract is a small slice of the contractor's total G&A base, your G&A rate follows their total corporate book of business and can move significantly with no change in your program's performance. Significant and unexplained increases in the G&A percentage on a major contract are the kind of finding that warrants a conversation with DCA, because the allowability rules are where accountability lives. Build a G&A percentage trend chart and compare it against the contractor's total business base trend. The two should move inversely. If they move in the same direction, something needs explaining. The three-panel G&A chart visually confirms the inverse relationship. Panel A shows G&A rate declining as the base expands. Panel B shows it rising as the base contracts. And Panel C shows it tracking the company's overall business base movement. Panel C is the one most analysts overlook. It represents the situation in which your contract is a small fraction of a large contractor's business, and your G&A rate moves with corporate decisions unrelated to your program. These patterns are diagnostic tools. When actual G&A behavior departs from expected behavior, the explanation usually falls into one of three categories: base expansion, base contraction, or corporate business base shift. Use these panels as a reference when reviewing G&A changes. The explanation should map to one of these three scenarios. If it is not, keep asking questions. Cost of money is the charge the contractor passes to the government for the interest cost of capital tied up in the program, typically running between 0.01 and 1% and applied to nearly all cost elements. The cost of money essentially covers the float in the financial system when the contractor has advanced funds for purchases before being reimbursed. On large programs, even a small percentage can represent significant dollars. The cost of money is not a major analytical focus in most programs, given its small percentage, but it should be confirmed against proposed rates at least annually to ensure it has not drifted. Review the cost of money rates as part of your annual rate analysis package. Flag any unexplained movement. Even though the percentages are small, unexplained changes in any cost element are worth a question. Fee is the contractor's compensation for completed work, expressed as a percentage of all cost elements and taking three main forms: base fee, guaranteed; award fee, performance-based with flexible criteria; and incentive fee, performance-based with fixed criteria. NASA has been criticized repeatedly by the GAO for award fee generosity, consistently awarding 95 to 97% of the available fee to contractors regardless of schedule or cost performance. Fee percentage analysis matters because it affects the total value of the contract and because how contractors forecast their fee affects what appears in the monthly cost report. Know what fee type your contract uses and what performance criteria drive it. Fee structure is a tool for managing contractor behavior. If the criteria are weak, the tool does not work. Award fee on cost-plus contracts typically ranges from 5 to 10%, while fixed-price profit can run higher due to contractor risk, and in competitive bidding can drop as low as 1 to 2%. The two methods of forecasting fees: cash basis recording actual expected payments versus accrual basis using a lifetime average, produce materially different monthly cost report appearances and must be understood before interpreting fee line items. Fee percentage variance in the monthly report is often not a performance signal. It can be entirely explained by whether the contractor uses cash or accrual fee recognition. Know which method your contractor uses before drawing conclusions. Confirm the fee recognition method at contract award and document it. When fee percentages vary from month to month, the explanation is usually methodological rather than performance-related. The two fee projection charts show the difference between a contractor assuming 100% award fee realization and one assuming 80%, and the analyst's judgment determines which assumption is more reasonable. A contractor that always projects 100% fee realization regardless of performance history is either genuinely confident in their execution or is being optimistic in a way that affects EAC credibility. Both are worth examining. The fee recognition method combined with performance assumption creates significant EAC variability. An analyst who does not understand both factors cannot interpret the fee line correctly. Determine which assumption is more reasonable based on the contractor's historical award fee performance on this and prior contracts. A pattern of 95+% fee realization on poor performing programs is a data quality concern. The NASA Form 533 is the primary monthly cost reporting mechanism for cost reimbursable contracts, received monthly as standard and available quarterly upon request. The quarterly 533 contains more detail than the monthly version and is an excellent resource during PPB budget formulation. Proactively requesting it at the start of the budget season is a best practice. The 533 is not the only source of contract cost data, but it is the most structured and most actionable for monthly analysis. Building your analytical rhythm around it is the right approach. Make sure every major cost reimbursable contract on your project has a 533 requirement in the data deliverables list. If it is not contractually required, you will not reliably get it. The 533 monthly report captures current month actuals, cumulative actuals, estimates for future periods, and the estimated final cost, providing both a performance snapshot and a forward-looking forecast in a single document. The 533 format was designed to be navigated in a specific sequence: current period first, cumulative second, estimate to complete third, and estimated final cost last. That is the analytical order that tells the most coherent story. The volume of data in a 533 can be overwhelming on a large contract. The 15-point checklist on the following slides is designed to give you a structured path through it. Do not read a 533 in isolation. Build a trend file that carries the key line items forward from each period so you can see how the numbers are moving over time. The quarterly 533 provides a more detailed view of contractor cost performance, including direct labor hours and cost by category, overhead, ODC, G&A, and fee, organized by period with cumulative and estimated completion columns. Every column in this report has a specific analytical purpose. Column 7C is cumulative actuals, column 7D is cumulative plan, column 9A is estimated final cost. The relationships between these three columns tell most of the story. The quarterly 533 analysis should validate the monthly trends and extend the picture through the estimate to complete. Discrepancies between monthly actuals and the quarterly Rollup-Warren investigation. Use the quarterly 533 to build or refresh your rate analysis for each major cost element. The richer detail makes rate trends visible that the monthly report compresses. The 15-point 533 analysis checklist is the analytical protocol that experienced NASA analysts have routinely applied to every cost-based contract report, a repeatable quality gate for every submission. Having a checklist does not mean going through it mechanically. It means having a structured starting point that protects you from missing something obvious while you're focused on a specific concern. Most analysts focus on a few things they are already watching and miss the systemic checks, math accuracy, reporting category consistency, and timing compliance, which surface data quality problems before they contaminate the analysis. Apply all 15 checks to every 533, not just the ones that seem relevant this month. The ones that seem irrelevant are exactly where surprises hide. The first four checks, timeliness, contract baseline, reporting categories, and math accuracy, are quality gates that must be passed before any analytical conclusions can be drawn from the data. A 533 received after the contractual due date is a contract violation. Most analysts let late deliveries pass without comment. Tracking timeliness creates accountability and usually accelerates future submissions. Math accuracy sounds elementary, but finding an addition error in a column of contractor data is a credibility signal. It raises the question of what else in the document has not been verified. Run the math check on every 533 before accepting any numbers for analysis. A brief discrepancy found early is much less damaging than one found after you have built a presentation around the wrong figures. Checks 5 through 8 focus on estimate quality, actual versus estimate variance, variance explanations, and the cost over obligations risk, which is the situation in which the contractor may incur costs without adequate funding authority. The 10% variance threshold for both estimate versus actual and actual versus plan analysis is a standard trigger, not a guarantee that everything below 10% is fine, but a reliable flag for when formal explanation is required. The cost over obligations check is legally significant. If current obligations minus the estimate to complete produce a negative number, the contractor may be working without coverage, which creates Anti-Deficiency Act exposure. Never skip the cost over obligations check. It takes less than a minute and protects against a legal problem that can be catastrophic if it is discovered late. Checks 9 through 11 cover available funding adequacy, invoice to 533 reconciliation, and overrun or underrun determination, 3 checks that directly connect the financial report to the legal and administrative realities of the contract. Comparing the invoice amount in column 5A to the cumulative cost in column 7C is one of the most revealing checks on the entire list. A significant gap between what the contractor claims to have spent and what they have invoiced warrants immediate explanation. Method 2 for overrun determination. Multiplying current monthly actuals by months remaining and adding to the cumulative to compare against the contract value is a quick but powerful forward-looking EAC estimate that requires no additional data. Run both overrun determination methods every quarter. They will not always agree, and the difference between them is itself an analytical data point. Checks 12 through 15 cover estimated final cost versus contract value, actual versus plan variance explanations, and rate analysis, the 4 checks that assess the health of the forward-looking picture. Check 12, comparing the estimated final cost in column 9A to the contract value in column 9B, should converge as the contract matures. If they are significantly different early in the contract life, that is acceptable. If they are significantly different when the contract is 70% complete, that is a problem. Check 15, the rate analysis, is where all the elements of cost analysis from the earlier slides get applied. Computing actual rates and comparing them to proposed rates is the synthesis check that ties the whole module together. Rate check 15 is the most analytically rich item on the list, and the one most analysts skip because it takes the most work. It is exactly the one that catches the problems that everything else misses. Understanding contractor cost elements enables analysis of both proposed and incurred costs across prime and subcontract tiers. Labor is the dominant driver, and Pareto tells you where to concentrate effort. Regular analysis over time reveals trends that single-period reviews miss. The analyst who builds a running trend file from the first 533 received will understand the contractor far better by month 6 than the analyst who approaches each month fresh. Good analysts probe areas that are inconsistent with the proposed costs. Great analysts know what those inconsistencies mean before they ask the question. Develop a relationship with the contractor's business office. It is the last bullet and the most important one. The data tells you what happened. The people tell you why. 3 questions test the core Module 2 competencies: element-level variance analysis, G&A behavior rules, and the subcontract blind spot that the prime manages their subs assumption creates. Q1 is about labor mix versus rate variance, the 2 most common explanations for a cost overrun when hours are on plan. Q2 applies the G&A inverse relationship rule to a specific anomaly. Q3 tests whether the student has internalized the subcontract risk argument. A student who can answer Q3 without referring to notes has genuinely absorbed the subcontract risk message. It requires making an original argument, not just recalling a rule. These 3 questions should be answered before moving to Module 2. Module 2 builds on the assumption that the cost element framework in Module 1 is understood. Contracts are in place, and monthly data is arriving. The next step is the systematic budget execution process that governs how all of that data translates into obligations, costs, and ultimately completed work. The transition from contract analysis to budget execution is the shift from understanding contractor costs to managing the government side of the financial picture. They're complementary disciplines that must be practiced together. Contract analysis without budget execution is incomplete. You can understand what the contractor is spending without understanding whether you have the resources to pay for it through the fiscal year. Modules 1 and 2 are a pair. The contract tells you what is happening on the work side. Budget execution tells you whether the funding side can sustain it.